All right, we're back. What is up, boyos? We're talking about Uncharted, the movie. If you didn't know, I do a video game podcast every Monday at 3:30 p.m. Arizona time on twitch.tv/lonercast. So please go and watch that. Uncharted, the franchise, the video game, is something that I love, is something that I adore. I am a Sony fanboy, some people may say. That's not totally true, but I do love Sony, and I love my PlayStation, and I love Uncharted, and I love Naughty Dog. So I was curious to see what a movie of Uncharted would look like, and I was apprehensive. I was apprehensive for multiple reasons, really. For one, video game movies are notorious for being bad, not good, you know what I mean? Video game movies are known for that. And Uncharted, a game where I've played, all four of the main games, and I've also played the Lost Legacy game, and I've played Golden Abyss on the Vita. They're games that each game I've spent, 15 to 45 hours in, So condensing that down into movie length was something I was concerned about. Anyway, we're talking about Uncharted. I'm going to talk about it, both the merits of the film and how it stacks up to the video game. Uncharted the movie, you will be surprised to hear me say, is actually a big bucket of okay. It's not bad. In fact, at some moments, it's even above average. I think Tom Holland still is a bad casting decision for Nathan Drake. That being said, he carried this movie on his back. He's great. I think he's great in the movie. And when I say he's bad casting, he did the best he could with this. But to me, he's not what I imagine when I think of Nathan Drake. And that's maybe my own head. That's maybe in my own head. But the lady they got to play, Chloe, was perfect. I thought she was great in the role. Although I will say her accent slipped between English and then Australian. I don't know if she's English or Australian. I don't really know much about this actor at all. But it seemed like her accent was slipping, but maybe that's all in my head or something. But Mark Wahlberg was totally just Mark Wahlberg in this movie. He didn't even try to be Sully at all. He was totally just Mark Wahlberg, which was okay. And as the movie progressed, I started to feel them become their characters a bit more. But ultimately, Mark Wahlberg was still like, "Hey guys, what you doing? I'm Mark Wahlberg. Hey guys, what's going on down there?" He was Mark Wahlberg throughout this whole movie. "Wow, guys, this is crazy. What's going on? I'm Mark Wahlberg." He was just Mark Wahlberg. There were if you are a huge fan of the Uncharted games, there are some great references in here that you'll appreciate. Not a ton, but there's a couple where you're like, "Oh, hey, that's a thing." There's a few things that I think I appreciate. There are some changes that they made from the video game to the movie that I'm a little torn on. Specifically the fact, and it's in the trailer, so I don't think it's spoiling, the way they handle Sam, Nathan's brother, is a bit different in the movie than how they handled it in the game. And I'm not sure how I feel about it. It makes sense that they'd introduced it earlier, because that was a fault of the fourth game, where it's like, I feel like you're introducing this brother character a little late in the franchise, so it makes sense to introduce him earlier in the franchise in the movies. But the changes they decided to make with it, interesting. This is an origin story for Nate and Sully. Really, ultimately. This is how they became Nate and Sully. And that's what this movie is. That's what this movie is about. And it's an interesting choice, considering the first game, they're already Nate and Sully. And they could have done that for this game, or for this movie. But I guess that's just what they wanted to do. I think one of the biggest flaws of this movie was the fact that the music was so lackluster. And it's sad, because Uncharted, the video game, has a very iconic soundtrack, do 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 do, and they use that in this movie here and there, so much so that even the end credits is the soundtrack to Uncharted 3, the video game. And why they didn't just use the Uncharted soundtrack for the movie, I don't know. I don't know why, because what they ended up using was just like generic action. That's what they ended up using. And it's a little upsetting. This movie is a lot like National Treasure or Indiana Jones or Tomb Raider. They're exploring caverns, and they have the answers in their head. If something needs to get solved, they can just solve it because they're smart, I guess. And in this movie in particular, it feels like a cop-out. Like, oh, how are we going to get out of this? Oh, I have the solution in my head. It's a little, it's kind of a cop-out answer. At least with National Treasure, it felt like you were along for the ride and you were kind of trying to figure some of this shit out. They made you feel like you were figuring it out. And they gave you a character as well, with like the stupid character in National Treasure to like identify with. Where like in this movie, it's like, I guess Sully is that character, where it's like he's kind of the stupid one that we identify with, that we don't understand or whatever. But even he understands things, and so it would have been better if they didn't use that as a crutch so much. But it makes sense for Uncharted, because the video game does the same exact thing. The thing that makes it more acceptable in the video game is that you are playing the character and you are solving puzzles. Like, you are interacting with puzzles and solving those puzzles. So without the interaction of those puzzles, it's not as rewarding, I guess, and you don't feel as connected to these characters on that level. Speaking of characters, it feels like we're just thrusted into Sully and Nate working together as if from nowhere. We have no real history of Nate other than him and his brother were like orphans or something, and they lived with nuns, and Nate doesn't like nuns. But in between that and when he's a bartender, we don't really know. Did he go to college? We don't really know much. And Sully just kind of shows up. And that's the other thing about this movie. This movie feels like an Uncharted game that is speed ran. But not speed ran where like you get through the gameplay as quick as possible. It's speed ran as you have to get through the story as quick as possible, but for it to still make sense as a narrative. And that's the unfortunate thing of turning a video game into a movie. And I think that's why video games are more suited as television shows, because television shows can be, 10, 20 hours, however long it needs to be to tell the story. Where a movie is, hour and a half to 3 hours. I think this movie was 2 hours exactly. So you're losing a lot when you go from 30 hours to 2 hours. But ultimately, the movie is fun. And I do hope we get a sequel, which is funny, I'm sure, to hear me say, because by the end of this movie, I believed in Tom Holland as Nathan Drake, and I was like, I'd like to see him turn this character into his own. I'd like to see Mark Wahlberg turn Sully into his own. And spoiler, there was no Elena in this game, and that pissed me off, and I would love to see Elena in the next game. So, yeah, that is my review, I guess, of Uncharted, the movie. What'd you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Make sure you check out all the other content on the channel. Bye-bye. I love you.